Hello and welcome along to #SustyTalk, a brand new series of video interviews put together by Edie to keep our audience of sustainability and energy professionals talking, feeling connected and resolutely optimistic through this period of lockdown here in the UK and beyond, of course. I'm Edie's content editor, Matt Mace. It is Tuesday, the 14th of April. And so we in the UK are coming up to round about a month in lockdown. So it's refreshing to be able to arrange a virtual interview and actually talk to someone face to face. And joining me today for the second episode of SustyTalk, we have Dane Parker, the Chief Sustainability Officer at General Motors. So Dane, thank you so much for joining me. What is, I'm guessing, quite early in the morning for you over in the US.
Thank you, Matt. Happy to be here. Great
stuff. And I suppose a good place to start is how is lockdown going over where you're based right now? How is day-to-day work for you at the moment?
Well, I think we're on week 3 of lockdown here, and I was thinking about the things that I've learned in this, and it's been a difficult time in some ways, but actually a great time of learning and growth as we've had to be a little more creative with how we get work done and the way that we can care for our team members and reach out and make sure we stay connected has had to change a fair bit during this time period.
And in terms of change, are you finding that you're actually engaging and speaking to them more compared to perhaps when it was office based, or is it still very kind of frequent meetings with the sustainability team?
You know, our team, it's interesting because our sustainability team obviously meets with ourselves, but much of our time we spend with other people within the company and interfacing with others. And when you can't go over and see people in person in a meeting, you have to come up with new creative ways, just like this video interview we're doing. We do a lot more video chats and are trying to stay connected. And people obviously have a lot going on right now. And so you have to recognize the emotional situation everyone's in and the challenge they face, and try to connect in a way that recognizes that for them and the challenges they may have going on in their home, and the dogs in the background or whatever, kids, things like that. But make it more personal and still try to have those interactions to move things forward.
And in terms of just, I suppose, the general disruption that the coronavirus is causing, I mean, we've seen through a survey of our audience that many are having to kind of postpone or just put on hold some aspects of comms or even new announcements around the strategy. Have you found that it's slowed down what GM would otherwise be working on sustainability, or is it kind of all steam ahead, albeit very virtually?
That's a great question. I think what you might see externally is a slowdown because there really isn't any place in the news, unfortunately, for much else other than this COVID-19 crisis. And so in terms of things we'd like to share externally, we do have some great stories, things that we're accomplishing and ready to announce that we're intentionally waiting to announce until we can find a place that we think people will have time to hear them. But at the same time, internally, we're as engaged as we've ever been, and are kind of like, I guess, a duck. We're above the water. It might look fairly calm and still, but we're paddling hard under the water so that we don't lose ground and we don't lose progress during this time.
And what would you say are, I mean, going into this and then what you're still working on now, what are the key kind of areas in terms of GM's sustainability strategy? I know obviously the zero emission vehicles is a big aspect of the wider drive, but what kind of areas were the focus going into this situation?
Well, you actually got the main one, which is our products. And so zero emissions vehicles and then the related supply chains around that, including energy supply and renewable energy, were big going into this, and they'll be big coming out of it for us. So the work that we have to do internally to get ready for the high volume battery electric vehicles that we'll be launching continues. And for us, this won't be too much of a disruption for that. In fact, as we look at, as a company, we've made some great efforts to not disrupt the progress we're making internally on electric vehicles. So that will continue. The progress we're making with supply chain and with circular economy principles in our supply chain also continues. And then the renewable energy will continue to be a big focus for us. And it's something that we have some announcements in that area that we're, again, progress we've made, we want to share, but we're waiting till an appropriate time to be able to share them.
And in terms of external engagement, I'm specifically on the supply chain front. I imagine it's quite a big, complex supply chain that probably spans multiple countries with organisations of multiple sides, not just on the energy front, but on the kind of sourcing of materials for the vehicles. I imagine, and that might not be your remit, but engaging across the supply chain in this current time must be a really tricky task.
It is actually part of what I work on, and one of the hats I wear in the company. Definitely have interactions with supply chain and with the suppliers, and it is hard for those very same reasons that all of us are disrupted personally and individually. When you spread that across literally tens of thousands of employees and suppliers, it gets to be very complex. The good news I'd say in that is, as we interact with suppliers, we haven't seen people saying, hey, don't bother me about the future, I'm too worried about today. People are very worried about their own health and their well-being and their safety. And so we're going to great lengths to help make sure that when we can come back to work collectively, and that includes our supply chain, we do that in a way that consistently and safely allows employees to work wherever they are. And I think once we've taken care of people's concerns around their safety, they're going to be equally engaged in how can we make the future better and what can we do. In fact, I have a meeting tomorrow morning with over 300 of our suppliers to talk about CDP and the things we're asking them to do from a disclosure perspective on that. And so far, the replies we've had of people who are confirmed attending is higher than we actually would have expected.
That's great to hear. I think one of the weirder aspects of this has been how virtually more people are just able to liaise and discuss literally at the kind of more of a drop of a hat. It probably helps that people maybe have a bit more flexibility in their schedules because of the working scenario. And then you mentioned kind of still kind of developing the response to COVID-19. Is there anything GM in particular is doing in the current situation? Any kind of collaborations that you are forming to help, I suppose, more kind of on the ground stuff that's happening out in the US? Or
yeah, we've as a company, we're actually involved now in the making of ventilators and masks. And that's something that one of the great things that's come out of this is, I think, creativity. And, as I think about it as it relates to climate overall, a lot of times we look at problems like the climate, and sometimes I think we struggle to find creative solutions in time periods that are reasonable. And there's nothing like a crisis to show what people are capable of. And so, in our particular case as a company, in just a few weeks, we've become a manufacturer of ventilators, and working with a very small manufacturer in the U.S. who was producing about 200 a month. We're going to go to producing in the thousands, and we're doing the same thing with masks. We're producing masks in the thousands now per day, and it's pretty exciting to see people rally around that and to want to do that. And it actually, I think, demonstrates what's potential and what we have the capability to do to solve other problems when we think about the climate going forward.
And I think we've seen a lot of, I suppose, thought leadership on that area, the similarities in response to the coronavirus and the longer term efforts to kind of curb climate change. I mean, flattening the curve on the coronavirus is quite a well-discussed term, and there's been some efforts to kind of mimic that in terms of how we should approach climate change more long-term, and hopefully this is much more settled down. And we've seen, I suppose, the short-term, I don't want to call them benefits in a global pandemic, but what the impact this is having on the environment in terms of better air quality, lower emissions. But it sounds like there's going to be some retaliatory emissions as production ramps up. But clearly there is a connection between a global response to a virus pandemic and what a global response could be to climate change. Do you have a view on whether there's some learnings from this at a probably a more kind of political level or even just a business decision level?
Absolutely. And I think, the key point, what you mentioned, is that people have experienced something different. And in many ways, at least for the last many years that I can remember, there hasn't ever been a period where people globally have been able to actually see and feel what a different environment might be like. What would a city be like without congestion? What would air be like without pollution? What does water look like when it hasn't been polluted? And so now that people have experienced that, I think that will help us politically, because in many countries, politics are the sum of the desires and hopes and ambitions of the people in those countries. And I hope what people have seen will change the sense of urgency they feel to have a different future. And like you said, certainly we don't want unemployment to be normal, and we want people to be able to get back to work, and we want production to resume. But what I hope will happen, and I feel strongly that it will, is that people will want to do that in ways now that also give them the benefits they've just experienced, that allow them to have clean air and clean skies, that allow them to see, the bottom of the river or the canal that they walk along, and to experience going to work without the congestion that they normally experience. So I think this will help people see a different future. And as we get back to work, then maybe work harder to make that future the new normal.
And do you think that's going to have any impact specifically on General Motors and obviously EV production, car sales? Do you think consumer attitudes might change and that may inadvertently speed up the EV transition, for example?
I believe it will. There are some, and I've read a few things where people are concerned that then in some ways when some of the crisis passes, people will return to the buying behaviors of old, and that low fuel prices and low oil prices will spur on the growth, let's say, of internal combustion engines. I actually believe that this will help people want to drive electric vehicles in the future, that they now that they can see, and especially in countries that have major air pollution challenges, that people will see what a clear sky is, and they will see that their behavior impacts that directly. And maybe that's a connection that will be new to them, and they will desire to have an EV. We still need to have affordable EVs across the different kind of products people want. And so that's our challenge. That's why we continue to paddle underwater to get those vehicles and those products ready for people. But I think this will actually help long term. This will help the demand for electric vehicles.
I like the terminology about the paddling and the kind of metaphor of the duck and the stillness of the water, which it can seem. And I think a lot of people are looking ahead post kind of lockdown, when things do turn to somewhat a normal, ideally a new normal, certainly around the green economy. But I think a lot of people, I mentioned that survey we did, a lot of people are kind of struggling because of postponing announcements, because of suspending spending on energy projects and sustainability projects. And I think a lot of people are still trying to get to grips with what is day-to-day life now in terms of being a sustainability professional. I mean, what advice would you give in terms of just them being able to kind of really get on with their day-to-day working, and perhaps even just take a step away from this wider fear that certainly this pandemic can bring?
Yeah, there's two things that I try to do personally that I found helpful. One is to take the long view. And sustainability is about the long view. It's about creating a future that we can all thrive. And as a company, I think we're fortunate in that whether it's energy supply or our products, we have to take the long view. You can't get a green grid tomorrow, and we can't release 20 different EVs in a week and a half. So this for us, although a month or 2 months or even 3 months might feel very difficult for individuals, if you can step back and say, well, let me look 2 years in the future, or 3 years or 5 years, it helps give you the energy today to keep doing the things today that are going to benefit 2 years and 3 years and 5 years down the road. And the other thing that I'm doing that I found very helpful, and I think our team is doing, is using this time to learn, because there's things I've wanted to read and study and there's data that I'd like to have a chance to ponder more carefully. And this can give us a time to actually have some time to sit back and learn and read and study and see what's out there that's not news, that's not negative, that's not fearful and frightful, but actually that you can come out of this better prepared to lead forward and with a clearer vision of what the future can be.
That's some really strong advice, and I think that's applicable to all professions across all sectors, really. And I suppose then, as a follow-up, just in terms of also getting away from the day-to-day stuff, like for me, my office is my living room. So I finish work at my desk and I go to the sofa in front of the TV, or I can go for my one run for the day. And I suppose what do you kind of do just to kind of separate, to unwind, to separate sustainability work from home life? Are there any kind of recommendations you'd give there?
Yeah, well, in fact, it's an interesting question because, the question is, how do you separate sustainability work from your home life? And in some ways, the answer is to be sustainable as a human being. You have to find some ways to balance, work and your life in general. And I tell you what I've learned is that there is some good research that some people prefer to be integrators, where everything all meshes into one, and some people work better as segmenters. And what I've learned is I'm a better segmenter, which, as you said, if your work is your living room, at some point you still leave. And when you leave work there so that you go have some food in a different room, or if you go for a walk, in my case, I'm able to work in a separate room, so I eat in a different place. And what I try to do is I at least try to segment my day so that when I'm not in that space, I try not to be working, so that it doesn't follow me 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, that I can actually take a walk, have some food, or if I'm going to call a friend, as silly as this is, I'll call them from a different place than where I do my work. And that's helped me personally.
Okay, no, that's great advice as well, Dane. And just to finish on then, rather than just kind of getting stuck down on coronavirus, as 2020 hopefully resembles some sense of normality, kind of probably looking ahead more towards kind of late summer, autumn here, what's kind of on the agenda for you at GM? What are the kind of the areas of focus going to be?
We're going to continue working with our suppliers, and so we'll continue to have interactions with our supply base around their goals and their reporting and material content for our vehicles. We're pretty excited about some of the things our suppliers are doing to have low carbon supply chains and to have circular economy supply chains. So that will continue. And then as we engage our employees, one of the things that I'm excited about is the opportunities that we have internally. We do workshops and seminars and things to get our employees excited about the contributions they can make personally and the difference they can make. And so that'll be a big focus when we're able to gather together in groups again, some of the brainstorming and the thought leadership that we get as we get together with our team members.
Well, hopefully that's a lot sooner rather than later. Although the trajectories and trends seem to change day by day. But Dane, I did kind of I've been asked to kind of keep these chats down to around 15 minutes, which I believe we're just about on. So I'm going to have to stop us there. But thank you so much for being a great guest on what is a relatively new series for us. I know just how manic things are for everyone at the moment, and the fact that you've kind of dialed in early morning means you've probably got a lot on your plate just for today. So I do appreciate you stepping up and showing in for this.
Well, thank you, Matt. I appreciate the opportunity, and it's always fun to talk about something positive and something we can look forward to together.
No, I completely agree. And for all those who have tuned in and watched, hopefully we'll see you again soon for the next episode of Susty Talk. I believe I'm going to be recording one later this week, and Luke's also got a couple planned too. So we've got a pipeline building, which is good. And in the meantime, stay safe, stay positive, and keep up the Susty Talk.